The man does not look like a traitor. He looks like someone coming home from work, late afternoon, February, cold. A narrow trail cutting through Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia. Bare trees, wet ground, a small wooden footbridge ahead. In his hand, a plastic bag stuffed with classified documents. He is not running. He is not dressed like a spy from a movie. He moves with the flat, forgettable rhythm of a government employee who has done this in his head 100 times before. Then he reaches the drop site. He places the package where it is supposed to go and turns away. And in the next instant, the woods explode. Federal agents rush in from cover. Bodies collide. The man is slammed to the ground just yards from the bridge. Hands pinned, face in the dirt. Years of deception collapsing in one brutal movement. This is not a Russian officer, not a courier, not a foreign asset trying to slip through American surveillance. The man under arrest is an FBI agent. That is the moment the story seems to begin. But it had already been going on for decades. For years, somewhere inside the most powerful domestic security service in the United States, someone had been feeding secrets to Moscow. Not scraps, not rumors. Real intelligence, names, operations, methods. Highly sensitive material that could burn investigations, expose assets, and tear open the hidden architecture of American counterintelligence from the inside out. Again and again the damage appeared. Again and again, the source remained invisible. People inside the system started asking the question that every security service dreads most. What if the breach is not outside the building? What if the enemy already has a desk here? That possibility changed everything. Because once that thought enters a counterintelligence office, trust becomes a hazard. Every locked drawer means less. Every badge looks thinner. Every colleague becomes a possibility. And the worst part was this: the man at the center of it all was not some reckless extremist or obvious misfit. He was exactly the kind of person an institution like the FBI was built to trust. Experienced, disciplined, quiet, deep inside the machinery. The kind of man who understood how spies were hunted, because hunting spies was his job. Which meant that if he really was the mole, he had not just betrayed the Bureau. He had learned how to hide by studying the people assigned to find him. And long before agents tackled Robert Hanssen in that winter park, the most dangerous part of the story had already happened. He had been allowed to become invisible. To understand how this happened, you have to rewind to a far less dramatic scene. No park, no arrest team, no flashing headlines, just offices, corridors, security doors, fluorescent light, the quiet geometry of the FBI. Robert Hanssen fit into that world almost perfectly. He was not loud, not charismatic, not the kind of man who pulled attention toward himself. Inside the Bureau, that could look like seriousness, discipline, control. He built a career in some of the most sensitive corners of American counterintelligence, moving through assignments in New York at FBI headquarters in Washington and in divisions tied to national security. Those jobs gave him something more valuable than status. They gave him access. And in intelligence work, access is everything. Because the most devastating spy is rarely the one who sneaks in from outside. It is the one who already belongs there. The one who knows which files matter, which systems are fragile, which names must never be exposed. The one who understands not just what to steal, but what kind of theft will cause damage years later. According to later findings, the first crack opened in 1979. Hanssen was then working Soviet counterintelligence in New York, exactly the kind of post designed to identify hostile penetrations. Instead, behind that official role, he made a private decision that would poison the next 2 decades of his life and a large part of the FBI's. No dramatic recruitment, no alleyway meeting with a handler under a street lamp. Just a silent act of betrayal carried out by a man who understood the value of what he held. Later, he would use the alias Ramon Garcia. The name itself sounds almost plain. That was part of the danger. Hanssen did not need theatrical tradecraft to become deadly. He needed patience. He needed discipline. Most of all, He needed the Bureau to keep seeing him as what he appeared to be, a trusted insider, doing difficult work in a difficult world. And that illusion held. Years passed. Assignments changed. He remained inside the system close enough to the Bureau's most guarded information to do catastrophic harm. Around him, the Cold War was producing paranoia, defections, surveillance games, double agents, and escalating pressure between intelligence services that already assumed the worst about each other. In that atmosphere, every sensitive file was a weapon. Every exposed source could become a death sentence. Somewhere in that machinery, Hanssen had begun crossing a line that would not stop with one document, or one payment, or one act of disloyalty. Because once a man like that decides he can betray his own side and remain undetected, the question is no longer whether he will do it again. The question is how much he will take before anyone realizes the leak is coming from inside the hunt itself. By this point, Hanssen was no longer simply passing secrets. He was building a system. It was cold, methodical, and almost insultingly simple. Handwritten notes, dead drops, signal sites, small marks left behind to tell the Russians a package was waiting. A piece of chalk, a pin, nothing dramatic, nothing modern. And that was exactly why it worked. The tradecraft felt old-fashioned, almost trivial, but in the hands of a patient insider, it became devastating. By day, Robert Hanssen remained what the FBI believed he was, a veteran agent, working in the world of counterintelligence. By night, and in the spaces between routine, he became something else entirely. A man feeding one of America's greatest adversaries, with the kind of intelligence money alone could never buy. The scale of the betrayal grew slowly enough to hide, but steadily enough to become historic. Over more than 2 decades, Hanssen delivered wave after wave of classified material. Thousands of pages, digital files, highly restricted reporting, internal methods, technical operations, the hidden grammar of how the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community watched, listened, and hunted. This was not one reckless leak. It was a long-running pipeline of secrets moving out of the Bureau in silence. And some of the most dangerous information was not about machines. It was about people, real people inside the Soviet system who had secretly worked with the United States. Human sources whose names were never supposed to leave a vault, much less end up in hostile hands. Once those identities were compromised, the damage stopped being abstract. A burned source is not just an intelligence setback. It can mean interrogation, prison, execution. A life erased because someone inside the FBI decided that access could be converted into cash. And Hanssen was being paid. Money, diamonds, luxury watches, accounts linked to Moscow. The rewards mattered, but the money alone does not explain the discipline. What made him so dangerous was not greed by itself. It was control. He was able to betray his country repeatedly, watch the system absorb the damage, and keep walking back into secure offices as if nothing had happened. That is when the story becomes larger than one corrupt man. Because for Hanssen to survive this long, he needed more than cunning. He needed blind spots inside the Bureau, missed warnings, incomplete records, half-seen concerns that never became decisive action. He needed a security culture that could sense something was wrong without accepting how wrong it really was. And as the years passed, the cost kept rising. Not only because secrets were leaving, but because the one man helping Moscow understand the FBI was a man the FBI still trusted enough to let near its deepest wounds. By late 2000, the hunt had turned inward. Somewhere inside, the FBI investigators were no longer just chasing a theory. They were circling a name, quietly, carefully. Because if they moved too early, the man they were after would vanish, back into the bureaucracy that had protected him for years. And Robert Hanssen was not careless. Even near the end, he was still checking, still probing, watching signal sites, looking for signs that someone might be watching him. That made the final phase of the case feel less like an arrest operation and more like a contest of nerves. The Bureau had to let him move, let him believe the mask still held, let him walk, let him prepare. Let him reach for one more transfer. Every step mattered because the stakes were now unbearable. If Hanssen sensed pressure and destroyed evidence, one of the most damaging espionage cases in American history could end in ambiguity instead of proof. The FBI did not just need suspicion. It needed the moment. The act. The physical betrayal in real time. So the trap was built around his own method. Dead drop, old-school tradecraft. A hidden exchange in an ordinary place. No dramatic handoff. No handler stepping from the shadows. Just a package, a signal, a location and faith that the other side would understand. That was the world Hanssen trusted. The world he had used for years. On February 18, 2001, that world closed around him. Foxstone Park looked harmless enough. A suburban patch of woods in Virginia. A trail. A wooden footbridge. Winter trees stripped bare. Nothing about the place suggested it was about to become the scene of one of the most humiliating arrests in FBI history. Hanssen arrived, carrying a plastic bag filled with classified documents. He moved down the path like a man repeating a routine. No rush, no visible panic. Just the practiced calm of someone who had survived too long to believe he could still lose. He reached the wooden bridge, placed the package at the drop site, and turned back toward his car. That was it. The final act of a double life, reduced to a few seconds in a quiet park. Then the arrest team hit him. Agents surged from cover. The distance disappeared instantly. Hanssen was driven to the ground before the reality of the moment could fully register. For more than 20 years, he had hidden inside the system built to catch men like him. Now that same system had its hands on him. No gunfire, no chase, no escape. Just a cold patch of earth, a plastic bag of secrets, and the exact second, a ghost inside the FBI became undeniable. Once Robert Hanssen was in custody, the shock did not come from who he was. It came from how long he had lasted. The man on the ground at Foxstone Park was not a sudden breach. He was the accumulated failure of an entire security culture. For more than 22 years, he had operated inside the FBI, while passing some of the Bureau's most sensitive secrets to Moscow. By the time the case was fully exposed, the betrayal stretched across more than 40 transfers, thousands of classified pages, digital files, and an intelligence loss so severe that even senior officials struggled to describe its full depth. Some of the damage could be counted. Cash, diamonds, luxury watches, hidden money tied to Moscow, the ordinary trophies of espionage. But the real cost was harder to measure because much of it was human. Hanssen had exposed highly valuable operations, and some of the most sensitive sources the United States had inside the Soviet system. Once those names were in Russian hands, the consequences moved beyond intelligence failure and into something darker. Sources were compromised. Lives were broken. In some cases, men who had secretly helped the United States were arrested and later executed. Those losses did not happen at Foxstone Park. They had happened years earlier in silence, because one man inside the FBI chose to sell what was never his to sell. And even then, the story refused to become simple. Because Hanssen did not survive for decades on cunning alone. He survived because warning signs failed to become action. Colleagues saw reasons for concern. Security gaps appeared. Trust was not withdrawn fast enough. Records were not handled the way they should have been. Access remained. The system did not just miss the threat. In crucial ways, it preserved him. That is what makes the case endure. Hanssen pleaded guilty on July 6, 2001. The deal removed the death penalty from the table, and on May 10, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The legal case ended there. The historical meaning did not. Because this was never only the story of a mole. It was the story of what happens when an institution built to detect betrayal cannot imagine the betrayal wearing one of its own badges for 20 years. Long after the arrest, long after the sentencing, that remained the most disturbing truth of all. The worst blow to American counterintelligence had not come crashing through the front door. It had spent decades walking calmly through secure hallways carrying an FBI credential.